Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's just coming up to time for the great debate. I am Colm, and I'm a moderator, which is wonderful. This is the first time I've ever been a moderator in the same room as Peter Greenhouse. Normally we are debating, and I have never won a debate with Peter. So I'm really looking forward to this one where I can be completely neutral. And it's fantastic to be here in Zagreb. I just love the place. I'm Irish, so I feel perfectly at home in the torrential rain that we've had for the last 2 days. But actually, it was one glorious day on Thursday that we did a walking tour. It was fantastic. Really loved being here. So the title for this evening is, "This House strongly recommends the use of HPV vaccination after initial treatment of HPV genital lesions." And I'm moderating, and we have Professor Elmar Joura from Austria, and Colm, Mr. Peter Greenhouse from Bristol. And as the moderator, I am supposed to be totally independent, but I have a declaration of interest that I feel I must disclose. I have used HPV vaccination in patients whose warts kept recurring, at least 30 or more cases, and in pretty much every case, the vaccine seemed to help significantly. So I am a wee bit biased. I mean, here's just, I took pictures of them all, but here's just a perfect example. 22-year-old diabetic girl, relentless recurring genital warts, multiple successful treatments with TCA and imiquimod, but each time she'd come back a few weeks later, more warts, even a few new ones, in tears, and she said, is there nothing else you can do? Well, yes, I could write a prescription, £100, get the vaccine, and away you go. And almost, that was when she was before the vaccine. And this was the last time I saw her. She was thrilled. Just a couple of warts, a little bit of TCA, continued to pick them out, and she was absolutely delighted. Amazing result. Was it the vaccine? I'm talking anecdote here, which is not science, but it has influenced me. So, can I still be the moderator? So, you've heard the motion. I strongly recommend the use of HPV vaccination after initial treatment of HPV lesions. And pro is Professor Elmar Joura from Vienna in Austria. And against is Mr. Peter Greenhouse from Bristol and generally around the world. So, Elmar, would you like to take one out? One more? So oh yeah. Oh yeah, and just to outline what's going to happen. So, we're going to have 3 votes initially, and I have 2 lovely helpers, Dr. Harrison and Dr. Eze, who are going to count the votes. Now, the first time around, there will be 3 votes: yes, no, and don't know. And the second time around, at the end of all this debate, there will be 2 votes, yes or no. No sitting on the fence allowed. So, who supports the motion? Who votes yes? You're going to have to put your hand up. Do you support this motion? Hands up. Okay, just keep a note because I'll forget.
20 on the side.
20. Okay, who's no? Okay, and who are the don't knows yet? Ooh, you boys have a bit of convincing to do. Lovely. So, Professor Elmar Joura, would you like to come up and take your side of the debate?
So, thank you for this kind invitation, Dobar Dan. It's a great pleasure to be here and to take the challenge to discuss with Peter. And that's my disclosure. And what's the scenario, what we are talking about? Are you aware almost everyone gets into contact with HPV during lifetime? About 10 to 20% have a problem with genital warts, precancer of the cervix, the vulva, the anus, and only 3% develop cancer. And But when we look at the whole population, it is clear those with disease are those at highest risk. They might be more susceptible, they might be more exposed, we don't know, but definitely once you are diagnosed with an HPV-related disease, you're very likely to have the same or another HPV-related disease. And since I'm a gynae-oncologist in Vienna, Austria, the focus of interest is cancer. And when we just look at women being treated for pre-cancer of the cervix with decolonization, then in long term, we see, these are data from California, they have a substantially increased risk for developing invasive cancer. And that's also true for all the other HPV-related cancers. So once you've had a colonization, and in a small country like Austria, that's around 7,000 per year, so it's a very high number, then there's a marked increased risk of anal cancer, vulvar cancer, vaginal cancer, and also oropharyngeal cancer, which is usually not on the radar, but we are seeing more and more cases of HPV-16 related oropharyngeal cancers, especially in men. And it's now more than a decade ago at the time when most people thought it's a vaccine for young girls and it doesn't really work in adults. When I had the opportunity to analyze the data of the phase 3 trial of the quadrivalent vaccine and to see what happened to those reaching an endpoint after they've reached an endpoint, because the population was perfectly randomized in between those receiving the quadrivalent vaccine and those receiving a placebo. And we were quite surprised seeing that we saw not only some effect, the effect was quite convincing. You see here the Kaplan-Meier curves of the reduction of subsequent disease in those being vaccinated. And when we look at the same data in a different way, then we saw about 65% of reduction of recurrent CN2+, so high-grade disease. Looking at CN3, the immediate precursor of invasive cervical cancer, it was more than 70%. Looking at any disease of the cervix, vulva, or vagina, there was a 46% reduction, and looking at genital warts and vulvar disease, it was more than 60% reduction. This was the very first publication on this topic, and this stirred a lot of interest. They did a similar analysis with the bivalent vaccine, which had approximately the same result, and a quite high number of studies followed. And this was the first of a few meta-analyses being published by a German group. And you see, after our publication, many more publications took place. And looking here in the forest plot analysis, you see there is quite consistently a 60% reduction of recurrent disease of high-grade lesions of the cervix. And when you do sub-analysis with respect of age, you find very consistent results, and also when you analyze if those women have been vaccinated before the colonization or after the colonization, the results look pretty much the same. And just earlier this year, the first study on the 9-valent vaccine, which is now in use in all the countries of Europe, there was an even 90% reduction of recurrent disease of the cervix. The question which is always raised by public health, is it cost effective? And thanks God, last year there was a publication analyzing an American model published in the Green Journal, so a high-ranked obstetric and gynecology journal in the US, and they came to the conclusion that within the setting of the US, this vaccination before or after a colonization is cost effective. Let's now move to the other sides of HPV-related disease. We have data on vulvar disease. This was a study run in Tuscany in Italy, and the finding was a bit less impressive than at the cervix, but in those not being vaccinated, there was a 32% recurrence rate. That's what you generally would expect in this population, and after vaccination, only 19% were seen. This was a prospective study, but a non-randomized one. We also have data from MSM in New York. The group of Steve Goldstone published anal high-grade disease vaccination after treatment. There was about a 40% reduction of recurrent disease of the anus. And now I want to move to the disease you're all probably most familiar with, genital warts. And what we've seen in the phase 3 study of the quadrivalent vaccine is comparing the rates of recurrent disease. After cervical disease, the rate was just above 10%, and for vulvovaginal disease, including genital warts, it was more than 30%, so the same what we all experience in our daily life. And looking at recurrent disease of the vulva, we found more than 40% reduction of any disease caused by any type of HPV, but looking at just the 4 vaccine types, and this includes 6 and 16, which are in this region the most relevant types, there was a 79% reduction of recurrent disease. And of course it also worked on the other side. So having been treated for vulvovaginal disease and being vaccinated, we observed a reduction of cervical disease, high-grade disease of more than 40%. We also did 2 years ago a short meta-analysis on data, especially on genital warts, what was available at that time. And summarizing these data, you see in the forest plot there was more than 50% reduction of genital warts, and again data from New York, from MSM, with anal warts in men from Steve Goldstone. There was a 50% reduction of recurrent anal warts in this population. And genital warts are also a serious disease, and I can show you some data from Denmark, population-based. We saw that about 30% of genital warts are co-infected with high-risk types, and when you look at the relative risk for subsequent cancer disease in persons suffering from genital warts, then you see in men a more than 20-fold increase in incidence of anal cancer, 8-fold incidence of penile cancer, and in women it's especially remarkable, a 15-fold increased incidence of vulvar cancer and 8-fold incidence of anal cancer. And what I want to mention also is the fact there's a study, the HITCH trial in Canada, 400 heterosexual couples, and women were positive and vaccinated or not vaccinated, and in those not being vaccinated, they observed a transmission rate to the male partner in the order of 30%, and not a single transmission in those women being positive and vaccinated. So these are preliminary results. That's not the final answer, but at least it gives some interesting aspect, and it also supports the idea of vaccinating those with vaccine. Looking at the global situation, there are a few countries where vaccination after colonization or other HPV-related diseases already funding. So in Europe it's Italy, parts of Spain. In Austria since 3 years we have a full funding for women up to the age of 45 undergoing colonization, and in German at least you get it when you apply to your insurance. And in Brazil, for instance, they also offer the HPV vaccination for all women with cervical cancer. Looking across the Atlantic to the HPV Practice Advisory Committee, they at least advise that you should consider HPV vaccination after being treated for high-grade lesions of the cervix. So I'm coming to the end of my pro statement. What we are dealing is a high-risk population, so people who already have disease have a much higher risk of contracting future HPV-related disease. We have quite a good evidence for cervical disease, and this includes 2 post-hoc analyses of very large phase 3 vaccine trials which have a fantastic data quality. We have only moderate evidence for other sites, but when you look at the data in total, you realize that there is quite a lot of consistency comparing those results. And finally, we have to ask, what's our daily job? Do you counsel patients, and do you want to give your patients, like you would do for your friends and for your family, the best possible protection? Then I advise to give a quite strong recommendation for vaccination in this situation. If there is an extensive catch-up program in some countries, they definitely should be included even more than the others. And of course, affordability is a big concern, but there are always ways to overcome this. And only if you are designing a public health program, then the key question is the cost effectiveness. So the question is, do I counsel patients, or am I designing a program? And with this view of Vienna, I want to say thank you, and I'm already excited to hear Peter's arguments.
Wow, some pretty convincing studies quoted in there. I wouldn't like to have Peter's task, but Peter, straight away we let you come up and see what evidence you're presenting and what evidence you disagree with. So, Peter Greenhouse.
Thank you, Colm. Dobar dan svima i puno hvala Miši i Suzane na poziva i odličnu gostoprimstvu. So it gives me the greatest pleasure and I think pride to stand here in this city 50 years after I first visited in less than happy circumstances. But since then, all my visits have been good, and I love this country very much, and I'm very pleased to be here. I've also got a wonderful challenge to take on Elmar in this very important discussion. And I'm going to open with a few important words about how you should conduct yourself in a debate. Now, of course, there's a deliberate reason for showing the slide this way, because this is just turning the tables on the English-speaking people in the room, native English-speaking people in the room who haven't got the first idea what that slide is about. And just imagine yourself in the position of all our foreign friends when they have to decode what's actually up there. But these are the golden rules of debating. Very simply, you define your terms, you know your enemy, and as Mishka was suggesting to us yesterday, you should be completely, totally ruthless. So let's get ruthless. But I've got some declarations to make. My first simple declaration is that I was often paid to lecture for SPMSD while Colm and I were doing the campaign to change the vaccine to Cervarix. But my most important declaration is that I am not a hard scientist. I get my stimulation and my inspiration from art, and I have the greatest pleasure and good luck that my colleague, or my opponent here, is from the wonderful city of Vienna, that ruled over this part of the world for many, many years, and has a fantastic scientific and artistic tradition. I was lucky enough to go to the Alte Neues Gallery in Berlin last year at the EADV and see the Successionist exhibition, and I portray my opponent as a successionist, and a successionist is somebody who steps down from or steps away from the established rules, or what we might call here the evidence base. Because remember, the motion is that we should be strongly recommending, and that's an A1 recommendation. And I don't think any of the evidence that my colleague has shown is up to that standard. So I'm going to use the stimulation of the successionists to keep you interested as well. If you're not such, you're also. I take it that most of you are hard scientists, but some of you aren't. So I think that Elmar has been touched by Circe, the goddess of magic potions, witchcraft, the woman who seduced Odysseus on his way back from Troy, and at the same time turned the rest of his crew into swine, or pigs, or maybe even warthogs, perhaps. And she was also christened, or called Polypharmacos, somebody who knows about many drugs. And that's also something that's quite important in our patients. So, can we strongly recommend HPV vaccination under these circumstances? Well, what are the criteria that we need? A strong recommendation, I mean there are lots of different ways of grading it, but a strong recommendation, you could either make a strong recommendation, a weak recommendation, or no recommendation at all. And of course the evidence grading has to be important. It would be jolly nice to have high quality evidence, but it might be moderate or low quality. But in order to fulfill the criteria for this particular debate, we need 1A evidence, and we haven't got it. So, which lesions? Well, it's going to be visible warts or cervical HSIL. So, what about knowing one's enemy? Well, now, one of the problems with having an enemy is that you think you sort of step back and think, is he scientifically sound? Because he's obviously totally obsessional. This is a warthog. And Warzenschein and lots of shame. In the Germanic, the Slavic languages, and even in Hebrew, it's the same word. And he's obviously, he's got something going on here. But my enemy is also my very good friend. And I was congratulating him on his birthday a week ago. And he's also a very distinguished gentleman and a very far-sighted gentleman who vaccinated his children. He did gender-neutral vaccination before anybody else, and he's led most of the research, certainly in Austria and through the rest of Europe. And I metaphorically take my hat off to him, and he's blessed to have a lovely family who are not unwell from having been vaccinated. They look in pretty good shape. Also important to know your enemy in terms of the company he keeps. This is his team, but also the company he keeps for his research. And we were also very lucky to have an excellent lecture by Miriam Reuschenbach yesterday. And she was able to prove quite beyond a shadow of doubt that these vaccines are prophylactic and must never be considered to be therapeutic. So we should use precise terminology, thanks to Miriam. So let's get on with it. 3 points to make, quite simple points. What are if we're going to be ruthless about it, what do the systematic reviews and meta-analyses recommend? And if we're not keen on what they actually say, what alternatives could there be? I mean, we'll have to tease this out. And then also, if you decided that there are alternatives, what is the true best use of your resource? So if we look at an Italian meta-analysis and review, this seems to support a treatment vaccines treatment in the CIN2+ group. And their conclusion was that adjuvant HPV vaccination is associated with a reduced risk of CIN recurrence. That's fair enough. But they also managed to show that there was absolutely no difference, no effect with warts, VIN, VAIN, and also other studies have shown no benefit from anal warts either. But when they put the actual data together, this was looked at also by another study that came subsequently from UCL. And they had the benefit, if you like, of hindsight and what the others had produced. And they looked at 18 studies, only 2 of which were actual RCTs. And although this seems to be biased towards favouring treatment, they were concerned that there was bias within the studies, it's unadjusted data, and there was inconsistent methodology across all the different studies. So they had serious concerns about these studies. Now, looking at the actual figures, these look pretty good to a non-statistician such as myself, but they still had reservations. And looking at the CIN3, although the relative risk is very low, the range is huge, so you can't really make any conclusion from that at all. So what did they say? The confidence in the results as assessed by their grading system was, quotes, very low to moderate, certainly not strong. What about vulval, vaginal, anal intraepithelial neoplasia? No benefit for warts as well and persistent incident HPV. So their conclusion said that HPV vaccination might reduce the risk of recurrence, etc. And the assessment of the quality of the evidence indicated the data were inconclusive. Now, at the very best, the very maximum we can award that is 2C under those circumstances. That's nowhere near sufficient. Okay, so what alternatives work better? What is the most important thing that anybody can possibly do, that they might be doing to promote their abnormal cytology, that you could just ask them to stop? Think amongst yourselves while I find my point. Well, it's smoking, isn't it? And we've known for many, many years, and Richard Doll was on this paper, so quite a distinguished gentleman, that your risk of cervical cancer is dose-related to smoking, it's dose-response effect, and they concluded rather presciently, long before Harold Houghton had really started to go to town. These data strongly support the view that infectious agents involved in the etiology of cancer of the cervix, that was correct, and they then surmised that smoking may have an independent carcinogenic action, which is actually untrue. They weren't far off though, and the people who put them right was actually the unit that I was working in at the time. Simon Barton was the lead author on this, and this was Albert Singer's unit, though I wasn't part of this group making the study, that smoking actually causes a 40-fold increase in coating and nicotine in cervical mucus, which damages the Langerhans cells, which are your macrophages that actually eat up your HPV particles in the basal layer. And it actually has a maximum effect in the transition squamous epithelium. And so basically, although the smoking isn't actually causing the cancer, it's stopping your body's natural healing process, and that persistence leads to oncogenesis. It's a similar effect, perhaps slower effect in some of the other tissues. Although interestingly, in the vulva, I remember when Mishko had his excellent conference in Savta, my good friend Willem van der Meijden from Rotterdam presented a lovely paper where he looked at all the cases of vulval VIN3 vulval carcinoma in his clinic, and 96% of those women were smokers, against perhaps 15-20% in the general population. So that's actually quite important, and they concluded this local immunologic effect of smoking on cervical epithelium may be the mechanism through which smoking promotes the development of cervical cancer. Well, nobody's come up with a better explanation than that, and I think everybody nowadays accepts that. And that's what we need to get across to our patients. Interestingly, does it have much of an effect on warts? This study in 2010 showed that there was a marginal increase, although it was statistically significant. It was only very small, but it's once again dose related to nicotine. Now, each individual cigarette only gives you an extra 0.6% risk, but you can see that if you're on 20 a day, it goes up in a linear fashion. So if you're on 40 a day, it's a 24% increased risk. So that's quite important. So what about the best use of resources? And Elmar actually asked this question, is it cost effective? And he came up with some American study. The idea that the Americans, who hardly vaccinated anybody, should actually be double vaccinating the people who happen to be in front of them is quite ridiculous, but anyway, we'll come to that in the discussion. So the best use of resources, you have to think about what's going on in your own population. And Arne Wikström gave us a lovely talk yesterday about what's happening in the rest of Europe and what's going on. So your public health cost effectiveness calculations are quite easy to do. Rather depends on your existing vaccine coverage rates. And so if you're in one of these countries, I'm quite sure what the Australian rate was, so I just put it at 95%, but it must be a little bit fixed here. But it's pretty high. So these countries seem to be doing pretty well. 70% is just on the edge. But any country below the line here, you don't have to be a genius or a public health economic specialist to make the decision that you need to target people who are not already vaccinated. And that's quite a simple calculation. Even it might be marginally more difficult to make in the countries that are vaxxed to the max. But I always fall back on these two British philosophers, John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham. Stuart Mill known for his doctrine of individual rights and responsibilities, and Bentham, of course, the great utilitarian. And you follow these two pathways, and you would look at, Stuart Mill would say, well, the individual can request their own funding because they're responsible for themselves. And Bentham would say the greatest good for the greatest number. He'd take the public health view and stand back and say that the best use is obviously going to be vaccinating the people who've not been vaccinated. Even in a high vaccine status country, there are lacunae. There are some parts of the poorest parts of the UK where only 50% of people are still vaccinated. And you just have to put more effort and more effort into those areas, because those are the areas of greatest deprivation and highest smoking risk. So that's about it. Let's wind up there. For as far as we can see, the motion has failed the test of benefit. There's no benefit for warts, VIN or AIN, and there certainly isn't a strong recommendation. There is, if at best, a weak benefit for CIN2+, and so you're just struggling to get to level C2. So I don't think that's sufficient to satisfy the criteria. Obviously, if you put a bit of extra resource into educating to stop smoking, you're going to do some great good in the population, not just for cervical cancer, but for loads of other things. And finally, of course, vaccinate the unvaccinated. Don't mess about with the vaccine in any other way. Thank you very much. Please vote.
This is going to get awkward. This is going to get awkward. Who made up this title? Marco? Was it you? Because the word strongly is causing havoc in this debate. And so, but it's in there, and debates are meant to cause havoc. And both speakers have talked about, the public health benefit, is it cost effective? What about personal? I mean, I know many of you people in there wrote a private prescription and got Joura-vs for your children straight away. You weren't waiting for any national program. It cost me over £1,000 to get my 4 young adults vaccinated a long time ago, the minute Joura-vs came out. Was that cost effective for me? Yes. Public health wise, probably no. And what about personal. Suppose you have a niece who gets diagnosed with genital warts. She missed out on the vaccine program, and the parents phone you up frantic. What should we do? It's terrible. She got genital warts. What are the consequences? Should we now get her vaccinated? What are you going to say? I bet every one of you in this room would say, yes, 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 get her vaccinated. So, it's open to the floor now, and you can come up and use the microphone and ask some questions or just make comments. And we love personal experiences if you want to share them.
Or personal invective if you need it. Spice things up.
Kit, please.
Thank you very much. I'm not entirely sure it's been fair. It's almost 2 against 1 in this debate. So maybe we should take that into consideration. I just want to ask, can you talk a bit about the sort of reasons that the vaccine might work after treatment? Is it preventing new infection, or is it changing some immunological process that would help us decide? Thanks.
There are probably a number of reasons why the vaccine should work. What's definitely clear, it prevents new infections, but it probably also prevents auto-inoculation. So you might remove the high-grade lesion at the cervix, but 1 centimeter away there's another low-grade lesion which is infected, which is not removed, and from this side you can again infect the other side. And this, when we analyzed the data, we saw it's more than just preventing new infections. And of course, when a person has a disease, the partner is probably still infected and you get back the infection. And for that reason, it's probably even better to vaccinate both, so to completely block the transmission.
If you have enormous amounts of money.
And please introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Nina Hieta from Turku University Hospital in Finland. So it encouraged to tell about our own experiences. So we have had perhaps 15 patients with very desperate case of condylomas. They just kept coming back after all treatments we gave over and over again. So we have vaccinated about those 15 patients. Half of them benefited. They were all young women in their 20s with type 1 diabetes, and which was badly taken care of, so they had high glucose levels. All other patients, including some with type 2 diabetes or high-dose corticosteroids because there are some other disease, none of those other patients benefited from these vaccinations. So are we asking the right question? So is it just, should we vaccinate all who have these HPV genital lesions, or are there some subgroups that we should we do some scientific research to find out who would benefit and to focus the vaccinations for those people?
Good point, and it's probably the one I was making, that if you see patients with genital warts, your standard treatment will get rid of them quickly in most cases. So are you going to vaccinate everybody, or just the ones whose warts seem to persist?
I think that's an enormously important point, and actually something the point I was making in the candidate lecture yesterday is that it's the immune function, the underlying immune function, that's obviously incorrect in some way. And one of your absolute necessities is to look at all those other possible causes of low immunity, such as uncontrolled diabetes or undiagnosed HIV, etc. Or maybe just very poor asthma control. That's another possibility. And so those people, I don't think there's any question that they would warrant anything that you might wish to try. But we're talking about the general population. However, the ones that you see most of, and certainly in my own experience, the women that I used to see after cervical vaccination would tend to be the ones who kept on coming back with the diabetics. And of course, teenage diabetics are notoriously difficult to control, and quite often they'd come back you know, 5 years later, they finally got their act together and they were okay.
So thank you for that. I'm a big fan of anecdotal medicine, so that's probably why I never get invited onto any guideline committees.
But Colm, then did you not show that there was excess water persistence in diabetics? That was your paper, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it was in small numbers, but it was important.
Any more anecdotes or hard evidence or comments from the floor, please?
Or no evidence at all.
Yes,
Or no evidence.
there would always be one.
I don't know if Raj wanted to say anything else. Well, since my name has been mentioned a couple of times, thank you. First of all, it is debate. So it's not penicillin. So we cannot have, if we were no for 100%, then this debate wouldn't have been necessary. If you have streptococcal infection, give penicillin, and that's it. Now, whatever we may do now, we are, working on something we don't know 100%. We cannot have 100% studies and so on. So we have to be brave a little bit. On the other hand, I remember, even myself, the time when the clinical pharmacologists from our department, oh my God, these stupid dermatologists, they do give penicillin or something for erythema migrans. Oh, erythema migrans is something that only stupid dermatologists can treat with penicillin. At that time, they didn't know for Lyme borreliosis and for Borrelia burgdorferi. Afterwards, Borrelia burgdorferi has been called a causative agent for erythema migrans, and then it has been, okay, it's very logical now, we give this for that. So that experience helped us, but as a dermatologist, we said, okay, we have good results with penicillin for that. Now, look, recommends. Okay, I agree this strongly is maybe too much, but anyway, recommends. This is far what we conclude here from the reality in practice. So if we recommend, we do one good thing. We rise the proportion of the vaccinated people. And rising the proportion of the vaccinated people of something which is not vaccinated enough, we make very good things for themselves and for the others, and we wait a little bit until Elmar and the other give some sufficient or additional evidence that this might work. So I think as a group of people advocating something, we might give a very good benefit for the population. That's the way I look at it.
Okay, so to wrap this up, I'm going to ask the two speakers to come up and do a 2-minute comment each, just to finally convince you. So, Elmar.
So, I'm very proud to be here and to discuss with these gentlemen, and they have a big story behind them. But they're coming from UK, and everything from UK is driven by public health and the question if something is cost effective. So, summarizing my point again, we are talking about the high-risk population. We are talking about adjuvant vaccination together with the surgery or topical treatment. We have seen quite a good evidence of reduced risk of recurrent or subsequent disease, a potential effect on transmission, and what we want is the best possible protection for our patients. And I fully agree when Peter was having in his last slide, we should vaccinate those not being vaccinated. So why should we leave out those we know that they have an elevated risk? And my final slide shows something about the scientific background of my opponent. So he has quite an interesting past, and yeah, I'll leave it to you and ask Peter for his final comments.
Okay. Well, yes, it's all past history. I wasn't very academic at university, but you probably knew that anyway. So I'd like to introduce the concept of evidence-based voting, probably something new to you. And I'm also going to be, shall we say, stimulated and inspired by Gustav Klimt, who wouldn't be. So let's have a look at these points of evidence-based voting. First of all, you really have to decide how strong is the evidence, because that's, if you're going to be true to yourself as proper evidence-based clinicians, that's what you're really voting on. Also, how robustly has the case been put by one side or the other? And also think to yourself, how much am I or how much have you been persuaded by the arguments one way or the other? Finally, you need to think about whether there are any extra little temptations, these things where the personal comes into the professional, and that's what Colm has been trying to sell you, and indeed some other people in the audience have been trying to sell you as well. So let's look at the strength of the evidence and where we go. Oh yes, I forgot, of course, that I need some more inspiration, and I wanted to morph this picture so that it would have the president of our society to watch over the rest of the proceedings. But I think it would also be something of a tragedy if we didn't also celebrate and thank very much both Misha and Susanne for their wonderful hospitality. So instead of tragedy, we have wider joy. So there we go. So the rest of the proceedings should go forward quite quickly. So basically, what's the strength of the evidence? Well, it's 2C. If you're lucky, it's not 1A, so there is no way that we can honestly, strongly recommend. And once again, we've already had the public health discussion. Put your Bentham hat on and set aside your John Stuart Mill hat. Although, of course, once again, in the individual circumstance, yes, you could recommend it, but it has to be individual rather than the public health. And also, let's think about the persuasiveness of this gentleman here. Now, he is a pilot, and you think, now, hang on, he must be cool, calm, and collected and controlled. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to think, but if you look into it a little more detail, stand back and actually look at his personal transport, his aeroplane, how obsessional you have to be to get this sort of registration number on your aeroplane. He's so obsessional about HPV that he actually told me this afternoon he would even vaccinate his dog. So how can you possibly take his word as his bond? So just this is the temptation. Circe is getting at you, seducing you to think that yes, I'll do this for me and my family and my friends, and for the public we'll do something different. You have to take a stand, you have to be true to yourself and answer the question properly with a proper evidence base. And the proper evidence base is that there is no way you can strongly recommend the use of HPV vaccination in these circumstances. You might be able to recommend it to your friends, but the recommendation cannot be strongly based on the hard evidence that you'd like to see for almost all the other conditions that we treat and that you insist on practicing with your evidence-based medicine. So I urge you once again to vote no, because you can't strongly recommend it. Thank you very much indeed. And one more thing is that when we meet this evening, I hope that we will sink some of these differences with a glass or two in vino veritas. That's also another Hans-Richard von Stuck picture. But I'd also like to raise a glass to the excellent achievement of my friend in leading the HPV vaccination as a PI for Europe. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I've listened carefully, and to me, this is, I'll just crystallize it for the audience. It comes down to, public health benefit, cost effectiveness, and personal decisions. And yes, the whole strongly and cost effective edges it towards Peter's point, but I would come back to that 25-year-old niece who's got genital warts, and the parents phone you up and say, do you think she should be vaccinated? So Are we going for anecdote or A1-based evidence in this room? You have to be honest with yourself. And I'm going to stay completely impersonal now and ask for the vote to happen. So, this House strongly recommends the use of HPV vaccination after initial treatment of HPV genital lesions. Have you okay, who's yes? Can Dr. Harrison and Dr. Ezzy do the count? Do you need to say anything? Just keep a note. Okay, no. And keep your hand up if you think the count is done. And there's no sitting on the fence. Everybody has to vote. Okay, that's fine. There's no sitting on the fence, so there's no third vote. So what have we got? Sure. I'm glad that you come to me with the figures.
A few words at the end.
Come up here. There's been a shift towards yes, this House does strongly recommend HPV vaccine.
Against all the evidence.
Well done, and thanks to my two speakers. And you know, as an Irishman, I'm delighted to say we have finished ahead of time. Isn't that a wonderful thing to be able to do with something as controversial as debate? So thanks for taking part, thanks for voting, and